Look, I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm some perfect person, but what happened to me was straight up betrayal. I'm Celeste. I'm 26 and I just got completely screwed over by someone who was supposed to love me. You know when you think you know someone and then they just show you who they really are? That's exactly what happened. And it's honestly disgusting. So, I was with Graham for 2 years. 2 whole years of my life I invested in this man. He worked doing some supervisor thing at a warehouse. Nothing too exciting, but steady money. I was working retail, which honestly sucked, but I was saving up for nursing school. That's something people don't realize about me. I had goals. I had plans. I wasn't just sitting around waiting for someone to take care of me. Graham seemed like a good guy when we first got together. He'd pay for our dates, surprise me with little gifts, do all the things that made me feel like he really cared about me. But looking back, I think he was just trying to impress me because he knew I was out of his league. I mean, I had guys hitting on me constantly at work, on social media, everywhere we went. But I chose Graham because he seemed stable and like he'd treat me right. The thing is, I've always been smart about money. My mom taught me that women need to protect themselves financially because men can just walk away whenever they want. So yeah, I kept my money separate from Graham's. I had my own savings account, my own checking account, and I wasn't about to just merge everything together because we were dating. That's just common sense. But Graham never complained about paying for most of our dates and trips. He seemed happy to do it, and I figured that was just how he showed love. I was giving him something way more valuable than money anyway. I was giving him me. Do you know how many guys would have killed to be in his position? Graham was getting the girlfriend that other men could only dream about. I supported him in ways that money can't buy. When he was stressed about work, I was there listening to him complain for hours. When his anxiety got bad, I was there calming him down and making him feel better. When he had problems with his family, I was there giving him advice and perspective. I was his therapist, his cheerleader, his emotional support system all rolled into one. The lottery thing started because Graham and some guys from work had this weekly pool where they'd buy tickets together. Honestly, I thought it was kind of stupid. Like, what are the chances you're actually going to win anything? But Graham was always doing these little guy activities with his friends, and I didn't really pay attention to it. I had my own life and my own interests. I should have known something was up when Graham started getting these texts that would make him smile in this weird way. When I'd ask what was so funny, he'd just say it was nothing or that Miles was being stupid. That should have been my first clue that he was hiding something from me. After 2 years together, why would he be keeping secrets? The truth came out in the most ridiculous way. Graham had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was taking a shower, and it kept buzzing with messages. I wasn't trying to be nosy, but when someone's phone is going off that much, you start to wonder what's so urgent. So, I looked at it, and there was a text from Miles saying, "Dude, I still can't believe you won 200 kelvins. This is going to change everything." I swear I felt my heart stop. $200,000, and Graham hadn't said a single word to me about it. I'm supposed to be the most important person in his life, and he's keeping something this huge from me. That's when I knew there was something seriously wrong with our relationship. When Graham got out of the shower, I was sitting on the couch with his phone in my hands. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He'd been planning to keep this from me. He started stuttering and making excuses about how he just found out and was still processing it, but I could see the text was from 2 days ago. 2 days he'd been lying to my face. I tried to be supportive at first. I said congratulations and asked him what his plans were for the money, but then he started talking about investing in his future and being responsible with it. He mentioned maybe helping his parents with some bills and putting money toward a house fund. His parents, people who barely acknowledged my existence, were getting consideration before me. That's when it hit me. Graham was planning to cut me out completely. After 2 years of being together, of building a life together, he was going to act like I didn't exist when it came to this money. He was going to make all these major decisions about our future without even consulting me. I started thinking about everything I'd contributed to our relationship. All the nights I'd spent listening to him worry about money and his future. All the times I'd reassured him that things would work out, that he was capable of more than he realized. All the emotional labor I'd put into making him feel confident and secure. And let's be real, if I hadn't been in his life keeping him stable and happy, would he have even been in the right headspace to win this money? Happy people have better luck, and I was the one making him happy. That money was as much mine as it was his, even if my name wasn't on the ticket. I decided I needed to be direct about what I needed from him. I couldn't just sit back and watch him make decisions about our future without including me. So, I explained to him that if we were really partners, if we were really building something together, then major windfalls like this should benefit both of us. I wasn't asking for half. I was asking for what seemed fair, considering everything I'd invested in our relationship. 75% made sense to me. Graham would still have $50,000, which is more money than most people see in years, and I'd have enough to finally quit my retail job and focus on nursing school full-time. But Graham reacted like I'd asked him to give me a kidney. He got this shocked expression and started saying things like, "That's a lot of money, and I need to think about this." Think about what? Whether his girlfriend of 2 years was worth investing in? Whether our future together mattered to him? I could see that Graham was being completely selfish about this whole thing. He was thinking about himself and his wants, not about us as a team. He wasn't considering how this money could solve problems for both of us, make both of our lives better. He was just focused on keeping it all for himself. I tried to explain it to him again. I reminded him about all the times I'd been there for him when he was struggling. All the guys I'd turned down because I was committed to building something with him. All the sacrifices I'd made to be a good girlfriend to him. But he just kept talking about it being his money, and his decision. That's when I realized I was dealing with a completely different person than the Graham I thought I knew. The Graham I'd been dating would have understood what I was trying to say. He would have seen this as an opportunity to secure our future together. But this Graham with money was already showing me that he thought he was better than me. So I gave him an ultimatum. I said, "Graham, I need you to really think about what you're doing here. If you can't see my value after everything we've been through, then maybe we need to reconsider our whole relationship." I wasn't trying to manipulate him. I was just being honest about what this meant for us. If Graham couldn't invest in our future together, then what exactly were we doing? Were we just playing house until something better came along for him? I gave him 24 hours to think about it. That seemed fair. Enough time for him to get past the initial shock and really consider what I was saying, because once he calmed down and thought about it logically, he'd realize I was right. He'd realize that sharing his good fortune with me was the smart thing to do. But I also knew that if he chose money over me, then I'd found out his true colors before it was too late. Because if he couldn't see my worth now, he never would. And I wasn't going to waste any more time on someone who didn't value what I brought to the relationship. I spent that night thinking about all the ways this money could change our lives. We could get a really nice place together, maybe even buy a house. I could finally pursue my nursing degree without worrying about money. We could travel, have nice dinners, not stress about bills all the time. It would solve so many problems for both of us. More importantly, it would show me that Graham was serious about us, that he wasn't just keeping me around for convenience until something better came along. Because honestly, that's what a lot of men do. They keep women around for the benefits, the emotional support, the companionship, the intimacy, but they never really commit to building something real together. This lottery win was like a test. It was showing me whether Graham was the kind of man worth investing my future in, or just another guy who'd take what he could get from me and then move on when it suited him. And I was really hoping he'd pass the test. When Graham's deadline was up, I could tell by his face that he'd made his decision. He looked serious, like he'd been practicing some kind of speech. We sat down in his living room, and I was genuinely hoping this was the moment our relationship would move to the next level. But then he said the words that showed me exactly who he really was. "Celeste, I've been thinking about what you said, and I think it's best if I keep the money and invest it in my own future." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything we'd been through, after all the support I'd given him, he was choosing money over me. He was literally telling me that 75% of some lottery winnings was more important than our 2-year relationship. I tried to stay calm and explain it to him one more time. I reminded him about all the times I'd been there for him, all the emotional support I'd provided, all the ways I'd helped him become the person he was today. But Graham just kept repeating the same thing, that it was his money, and he had the right to do what he wanted with it. Then he had the nerve to say that our relationship shouldn't be about money. Can you believe that? After I'd spent 20 minutes explaining that this wasn't about money, it was about partnership and commitment, he tried to make me sound like some kind of gold digger. That's when I knew I was dealing with someone who'd been influenced by outside forces. I asked him directly if he'd been talking to Miles about this, and the guilty look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He'd been taking relationship advice from his single friend, who'd never maintained a serious relationship in his life. I was furious, not just about the money, but about the fact that Graham was letting other people make decisions about our relationship. If he just talked to me like an adult instead of running to his friends for advice, we could have worked this out, but instead he was treating me like the enemy. I told him exactly what I thought about him taking advice from Miles. I said, "So, you're letting someone who's never been able to keep a girlfriend for more than 6 months tell you how to handle a 2-year relationship? That's who you want to listen to about commitment?" Graham got defensive and said Miles was just helping him think through his options. His options. Like I was some kind of business decision he needed to analyze. Like I hadn't been the most important person in his life for 2 years. I gave him one last chance to do the right thing. I said, "Graham, if you can't see my value after everything we've been through, then we need to take a break. I'm not going to beg you to treat me like I matter." And you know what? Graham just sat there. He didn't fight for me, didn't try to compromise, didn't show any signs that losing me would be a problem for him. He just watched me pack my stuff like I was some random person leaving his apartment. As I was walking out, I turned around and said, "I hope that money keeps you warm at night, Graham, because you just lost the best thing that ever happened to you." I meant every word. Graham had no idea what he was giving up. He was so focused on that money that he couldn't see the incredible woman who was walking out of his life. He was going to regret this decision for the rest of his life. I went to stay with my sister Corinne while I figured out my next move. I was hurt, obviously, but I was also proud of myself for standing up for what I deserved. I wasn't going to let Graham treat me like I didn't matter, no matter how much money he had. And honestly, I was confident that Graham would come crawling back once he realized what he'd lost. Because men like Graham don't just find women like me every day. He'd gotten comfortable taking me for granted, but now he was going to learn what life was like without me. I figured it would take maybe a week before he started missing me, 2 weeks tops before he came begging for forgiveness, because that's what always happens when men realize they've screwed up something good. But days went by and nothing. No calls, no texts, no sign that Graham was even thinking about me. I started to wonder if maybe I needed to make the first move. Not to apologize, but to give him an opening to fix things. So, I sent him a simple text. "I hope you're doing okay. I've been thinking about us." But Graham didn't respond. He didn't even read the message. That's when I started to get really angry. I tried calling him a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. Either his phone was dead or he was deliberately ignoring me. Both options made me furious. After 2 years together, he couldn't even be bothered to have a conversation with me. I decided to go to his workplace to talk to him face to face. But, when I got there, Graham's supervisor told me that Graham had asked them not to let me in the building. He'd actually told his boss that he didn't want to see me. I was so embarrassed. I wanted to disappear. Graham had humiliated me in front of his coworkers, people who knew we'd been together. He'd made me look like some crazy ex-girlfriend who couldn't take a hint. That's when I realized Graham was playing games with me, trying to make me look desperate. I wasn't going to fall for it. If Graham wanted to play games, I could play games too. I posted a vague status on Facebook about people showing their true colors when money gets involved. I didn't mention Graham by name, but people who knew us would understand. But instead of getting the support I expected, people started asking uncomfortable questions. They wanted to know exactly what had happened, how much money Graham had won, what I'd asked for. And when I explained the situation, they didn't react the way I thought they would. Even Corinne took Graham's side. She said maybe I should have been happy for him instead of immediately thinking about what I could get from his win. She said 75% seemed like a lot to ask for, especially since we weren't married or living together. I couldn't believe my own sister was questioning me. I explained that it wasn't about the money. It was about partnership and building a future together, but she just kept saying that Graham had a right to his own money. And maybe I was being unreasonable. My mom said the same thing when Corinne told her what was happening. She suggested that maybe I'd come on too strong, that men don't like to feel controlled. But I hadn't tried to control Graham. I just asked him to be a partner instead of acting like a single man. Nobody seemed to understand that this was bigger than money. This was about whether Graham saw me as someone worth investing in, or just someone he was dating casually. And by keeping all the money for himself, he'd shown me exactly what I meant to him. I started hearing through mutual friends that Graham was telling people his version of the story, making me sound like I'd demanded money from him and threatened to leave. He was painting me as manipulative and greedy when all I'd done was ask to be treated like a partner. Living with Corinne became impossible when she kept lecturing me about my behavior and suggesting I needed to reflect on what I'd done. According to her, I was being unrealistic and entitled. She kept comparing Graham to her husband, saying she would never have asked for money like that. But her situation was completely different. Her husband had always been generous, always thinking about their future together. Graham had never been like that until he got this money, and then he'd gotten weird and possessive about it. After a few weeks of Corinne's lectures, I had to find my own place. I could barely afford the tiny studio apartment I ended up in, and it was depressing compared to Graham's nice place where I'd been spending most of my time. I started checking Graham's social media obsessively, even though I'd blocked him on my accounts. I'd look from my work computer trying to see what he was doing with his life. And what I saw made me furious. Graham looked happy. He was posting pictures of nice dinners, weekend trips, new clothes. He was living the life that could have been ours, but doing it alone. At least I thought he was alone until I saw her. Some girl named Alara started appearing in Graham's photos. At first, I thought maybe she was just a friend, but then I saw pictures that made it clear they were dating. Graham had moved on, and it had only been a few months since our breakup. I couldn't believe Graham had found someone new so quickly. Someone who was probably perfectly happy to let him keep all his money because she didn't understand what real partnership looked like. Someone who was probably just impressed by his newfound wealth. From what I could see, Alara worked in healthcare and seemed to make decent money on her own. She was probably one of those independent women who didn't need a man to take care of her, which explained why Graham was with her. She wasn't going to ask him for anything. But what really got to me was how happy Graham looked in those pictures. Happier than I'd ever seen him when we were together. And that didn't make sense because I'd been the one making him happy. I'd been the one supporting him and building him up. I started to wonder if Graham had been planning this all along. Maybe he'd been looking for an excuse to break up with me and the lottery money had given him the perfect opportunity. Maybe he'd already been talking to Alara before we broke up. The worst part was that I couldn't get information about what was happening in Graham's life. Most of our mutual friends weren't talking to me anymore, apparently because Graham had told them I was stalking him, like I was some crazy ex instead of someone who'd been wronged. I tried to focus on rebuilding my life, but it was hard when I kept seeing reminders of what I'd lost. Graham was living it up with his lottery money while I was struggling to make rent. He was dating someone new while I was too emotionally damaged to even think about dating. My work performance started suffering because I was constantly distracted by everything that had happened. I was showing up late, calling in sick, making mistakes. My manager, who was probably just jealous of my looks anyway, started writing me up for every little thing. Eventually, I got fired. They said it was for performance issues, but I knew it was really because I was going through a rough time and needed support instead of criticism. I couldn't believe they'd fire someone for having personal problems. Without my job, I couldn't afford my studio apartment anymore. I had to move back in with my parents, which was absolutely humiliating. Here I was, 26 years old, sleeping in my childhood bedroom because my ex-boyfriend had been too selfish to help secure our future. My parents kept asking what had happened, why I couldn't just work things out with Graham. They didn't understand that I'd done nothing wrong. I'd asked for what I deserved, and Graham had shown his true colors by refusing. The worst part was that I couldn't escape hearing about Graham's success. I heard he'd invested some of his money in Miles's business, and they were both doing really well. Meanwhile, I was filing for unemployment and trying to figure out how to pay my car insurance. And then came the final blow. I saw the engagement announcement on social media. Graham and Alara, looking blissfully happy with her showing off a ring that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. They'd been dating for less than a year, and he was already proposing. I couldn't believe it. Graham had told me he wasn't ready for marriage when I'd brought it up after 18 months of dating. He'd said he wanted to focus on his career first, but apparently all he needed was lottery money and a new girlfriend to suddenly become ready for commitment. The engagement announcement had hundreds of likes and comments from people saying what a perfect couple they were. I wanted to comment something about how quickly Graham had moved on, but I knew it would just make me look bitter. Instead, I sat there staring at the pictures, realizing that Graham had bought that engagement ring with his lottery money. Money that I'd asked him to share with me, money that he'd said he needed to invest in his future. Well, apparently his future had included proposing to another woman. I could see exactly what was going to happen. Graham and Alara would have a big, expensive wedding. They'd buy a beautiful house, take amazing honeymoons, have kids who'd grow up with every advantage, and I'd be watching from the sidelines, still trying to rebuild my life. But I also knew that their happiness wouldn't last. Graham might seem different now, but people don't really change. Eventually, Alara would see the selfish, calculating side of him that I'd seen. She'd see how quickly he could discard someone who'd been important to him. The problem was that I was nowhere near ready to move on. I was living with my parents, unemployed, struggling with depression and anxiety. I wasn't exactly in a position to attract the kind of man who could give me the life I deserved. So, I was stuck watching Graham live out the life that should have been mine while I tried to rebuild from nothing. Every day was a reminder of what I'd lost, what I'd been denied, what I could have had if Graham had just been willing to share. I started having fantasies about running into Graham and having the perfect comeback ready. I imagined him seeing me looking amazing with some successful new boyfriend, realizing what he'd lost. But the reality was that I was nowhere near that point. Sometimes I wondered if I should have handled things differently. Maybe if I'd been more patient, if I'd approached it more gradually, Graham would have come around. But then I'd remember that I'd done nothing wrong. I'd asked my partner to consider me when making major decisions. That's not unreasonable. And honestly, I was glad I'd found out Graham's true colors before we'd gotten married or had kids. Better to learn that someone was selfish and unreliable after 2 years than after 10 years and a mortgage. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I'd invested 2 years of my life in someone who'd thrown it all away the second something better came along. I'd believed in a future that had never really existed. At least not for him. 8 months after everything fell apart, I was still living with my parents and struggling to find work. Graham was probably planning his wedding to Alara, living in their new house, enjoying all the benefits of his lottery win. The contrast was devastating. I knew that someday karma would catch up with Graham. People like him always got what was coming to them. Maybe Alara would leave him for someone richer. Or maybe he'd blow through all his money on stupid investments. Either way, he'd eventually realize what he'd lost. But for now, I had to focus on surviving each day. I had to find a way to rebuild my life from scratch while watching Graham live the life that should have been mine. And that was the hardest part, knowing I deserved better, but being powerless to change anything. The universe had a way of working things out, and I knew my time would come. Graham might be winning now, but his luck wouldn't last forever. And when it ran out, I'd be ready to step into the life I was meant to have. Because at the end of the day, I was still the same person I'd always been. Strong, deserving, and worth more than Graham had ever realized. That was something no amount of lottery money could ever change. And someday, everyone would see that I'd been right all along.